Thank you, David. Can we give David and DCPL another round of applause? As he said, my name is Ben de Guzman. I'm with the Mayor's Office on Asian and Pacific Islander Affairs, and we have been really proud to partner with DCPL as well as Loyalty Books. Christine is outside, and other folks from their team are here to help with the book signing afterwards. I am pleased to welcome you to tonight's event. October is a lot of things. We're celebrating a lot of things here. It's half of Hispanic Heritage Month. It is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. It's Filipino American History Month. I shouldn't forget that. But perhaps most directly related to tonight's discussion, it is, in fact, LGBTQ History Month. So it's really timely that you're here, Curtis. Curtis and I are old friends in the interest of full transparency. But as you kick off your tour, it just started, right? Like yesterday?
Tuesday.
Yeah.
The book came out Tuesday.
But it's really great to have you here during LGBTQ History Month. It's great to have you here in Chinatown. So Chinatown is part of a larger citywide discussion that we're having in Washington about how we come back from COVID-19. I mean, obviously, as Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, we have had our own kind of up and down experience with respect to COVID. But our role right now is to make sure that we remind folks that Chinatown continues to be the gateway to downtown. And the Chinatown Arch works both ways. Right? On one hand, we welcome DC to Chinatown, but at the same time, we connect Chinatown to all the conversations that the mayor has been having about downtown DC and how we need to come back stronger from COVID. So if you want to use the hashtag #BeDowntown, I will encourage you to do that as well. But regardless, my plug of the mayor aside, tonight we're here to welcome Curtis, obviously. Writer / producer / director / activist. It's from his website.
Everything.
He's a co-founder of the Asian American Writers Workshop in New York City. Curtis Chin served as the nonprofit's first executive director. He went on to write for network and cable television before transitioning to social justice documentaries. Chin has screened his films at over 600 venues in 20 countries. Wow, okay. His documentary...
You sound surprised.
It's a lot. His documentary, Vincent Hu, about the legacy of the hate crime murderer Vincent Chin in Detroit, is one of his documentaries.
And Ben makes a cameo.
I was going to say,
Okay.
It's the reason why I have an entry in imdb.com. No, but Curtis has written for CNN, Bon Appetit, the Detroit Free Press, and the Emancipator Boston Globe. He is a proud Michigan alum, go Blue.
A lot of Michigan people here.
And Curtis has received awards from ABC Disney Television, New York Foundation for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, and many more. His essay in Bon Appetit was just selected for Best Food Writing in America 2023, and I think that's something we might revisit as we talk about food.
Oh, yeah, that just came out on Tuesday as well.
Yeah.
Both, yeah.
So there's a lot of media that Curtis has been appearing in as a result of his memoir. But before we actually start, I did want to actually thank a number of the other organizations that have also been responsible for bringing him here. OCA DC, the DMV chapter of OCA, Asian Pacific American Advocates. The 1882 Foundation, Ted Gong is here. The Asian American Journalists Association, I know that I've talked to at least one or two of the members that are here. Obviously, the University of Michigan alumni. And a group that's close to my heart, Asian Pacific Islander Queers United for Action. They also help promote. So I have some questions. I want to make sure we have time for questions from the audience as well. But I wanted to start by letting you talk a little bit about yourself. Folks don't know you for 20 years like I have. But yeah, anything you want to say about the book and that sort of thing. So
Yeah, sure.
Everyone, Curtis Chin.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming in the warm welcome here. I love coming to DC. So as Ben mentioned, the book is called Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant, and it came out this past Tuesday. And I'm sort of at the start of a 40-city tour to promote it. Yeah, and it's been getting a lot of great press. But, as the title implies, it's about growing up in my family's Chinese restaurant. And I like to say that this wasn't just any Chinese restaurant in Detroit. This was the Chinese restaurant in Detroit. And so I sort of throw out a figure. I asked the audience, to guess, how many egg rolls do you think we made in the 60 years that we own? Because this is proof that, we were the best. Any guesses? 60 years. And these are all handmade, even the skin and the sauce. No math majors here? We sold over 10 million egg rolls. It was a really, really popular Chinese restaurant. And so it was a really great place to grow up, despite Detroit in the 80s being a very, very difficult time place. I mean, you had the auto industry that was struggling, you had crack cocaine, you had AIDS. I personally knew 5 people murdered by the time I was 18 years old. But despite that, my parents provided this safe oasis in the middle of the Cass Corridor, one of the more difficult areas of the city. And they were able to raise 6 kids. And so this book is sort of a thank you to my parents, thank you to that restaurant, but also thank you to my hometown of Detroit for providing me a great springboard to sort of move forward. And so do you want me to start and read okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read quickly a short passage from the prologue, and that'll set us up for some of the questions that you have. And so the book is divided into 3 sections of 8 stories each, 888 for people who know Chinese superstition. So there are all kinds of little Easter eggs like that. So the first 8 stories are elementary, middle school, and then 8 stories in high school, and then 8 in college, U of M. So I'm just going to start and read the first part. Okay. So, this is from the prologue. Welcome to Chung's. Is this for here to go? Armed with a smile and a red waiter's jacket with a perpetual plum sauce stain. That's how my dad greeted any new face who entered the lobby of our popular Chinese restaurant in Detroit. Interestingly, my great-great-grandpa, Gong Li Chin, had faced the same question in the late 1800s as he stood cold and alone on a rickety dock in Guangzhou, China, trying to decide his future and that of his young, impoverished family. For here or to go? For here or to go? As I got older, it was a question I asked myself. Starting in our restaurant's long and open back kitchen, where my family made some of our most popular items, including the tangiest barbecue pork and best-smelling almond cookies, my mom taught me my first lessons. Before diving into math, English, and geography, she began with a little American history, tales of elders and ancestors, our family as prologue. And so the rest of the prologue sort of continues with my family's backstory, talking about how my great-great-grandfather moved from Canton, China to Canton, Ohio, before realizing there weren't Chinese people there, and then moving up to Detroit, and following my family, through the Depression and stuff like that, and finally reaching, in 1967, Detroit had this thing called the Detroit Riots, which we call the Rebellion now, and during that time period, for the first time ever, my family had to close the restaurant, right, for 5 straight days. And during that time period, my parents actually had sex. And so I was born, 9 months later as their riot baby. And so I feel like that's why I inevitably talk about race a lot, because without that little incident, I probably wouldn't be here. So, so the rest of the book sort of continues about that. And it was that original question of for here to go. Do I stay with my family in this really wonderful restaurant, in the city that I love, or do I have to go out and be myself? Not only just because of the gay thing, but also because Detroit itself, there was just so few opportunities. At that time there. I mean, there just didn't seem like to be a future in the city. And so that's what a lot of the book is about, is that tug that I was having. So.
Yeah, it's a really powerful beginning, right? For here to go. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, we're in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 3 parts, right? So actually, the 3 questions that I have prepared.
Oh, okay.
So that works out also.
Okay.
So October is LGBTQ History Month.
Okay.
And I've been thinking a lot about coming of age as much as coming out. Right. So our office just hosted a Screen on the Green thing event in Chinatown Park a couple of weeks ago to celebrate Mid-Autumn Festival, and we showed Turning Red. If folks know that movie, it's about a young girl and her coming of age and the feelings down there and ooh. And one of the things that actually was so powerful for me as someone who did not experience coming of age as a young girl, is, how she began to feel about the crushes that she had on the boy band and, her period and what have you. Sorry, spoilers.
Yeah.
But the other kind of coming of age story that I also was thinking about as I was reading this was The Best Little Boy in the World, which was, I guess his name is, his pen name was John Reed. And, oh my God, why am I forgetting his name? He is a DNC fundraiser now.
Andrew Tobias?
Yes, Andrew
Yeah.
Tobias. So what's interesting to me about coming of age stories in general is how you think about kind of your emerging feelings of romance or sex or
Yeah.
what have you. And some of them are naughtier than others.
Yeah.
I don't think we get to hear enough about how girls feel about, the naughty feelings, So what did you think about? There's a couple of stories that he tells, at the risk of no spoilers, about kind of your beginnings of your realization of liking boys.
Okay.
So how do you, as a writer, how do you decide to write about that? How much do you reveal? How naughty do you make it? What's your process?
Well, first I should say that I joined a bunch of writing groups, and there was this one group that I joined actually in Scotland because I could do it online, and there was an elderly Scottish guy who was probably like 70 or 80 years old, and he was a bit conservative, and he actually asked is there a lot of sex in this book? And I actually said to him, don't worry. Luckily, I didn't have very much sex, growing up. And so, it's a very family-friendly in that sense. But in terms of the process of actually coming out, I mean, I don't know how it was for you, but at first, you don't understand what it is, right? You just have these really basic impulses of oh, here's a really attractive boy. I like to hang out with him. You just get this energy around them, right? And then you, at some point, realize, oh, it's something more. And I think that growing up in the area that I grew up in, which was called the Cass Corridor, it was kind of the red light district where you're literally exposed to, prostitutes and, pimps and, all this kind of stuff. I think you're exposed to things much faster. And so I was aware of these things much earlier, because, you're just surrounded by it. So maybe it's slightly different than growing up in the suburbs, I think. Yeah.
My first crush was Wonder Woman. But then I realized I wanted to be her, not
No.
whatever.
Yeah, no. My first crush was the Filipino boy in Chinatown, which I called the Filipino Fonzie, because he had his little curly hair and his white T-shirts. And then I started having crushes on our workers at the restaurant. So that's how I sort of got started. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So do you want to read another section? And then, because I have a couple of questions, and I think maybe it'll be cute if there's another thing that you want to read.
Okay. I'll read this part because it's really, because I want to make sure we save time for me to read the story about my mom, because I always like to read that story. But I'll read a really quick section. This is also from the first section of the book, and it addresses what you were talking about, like that idea of just coming out. Okay, and it's another short section. So this is so I numbered all the chapters like a Chinese menu. So this is A6. Okay, sorry. In Detroit, the Motown sound was everywhere, and in my mind, the one and only Diana Ross reigned supreme. Her sweet, youthful voice, combined with her radiant smile, served as an inspiration to me. In addition to sharing Chinese zodiac signs, the year of the monkey, we were from the same area. The international superstar had grown up blocks from our restaurant in the Brewster Douglas housing projects, the largest government funding housing in Michigan. Though Ross's label, Motown Records, had abandoned the city a decade ago, I used to fantasize that one day the singer would make a splashy return and we'd share a dinner for two in our front booth. When I reached 7th grade, Diana's hit, I'm Coming Out, came bursting onto the airwaves. You guys all know that song, right? Hopefully. It's a great song. Anyway, I'm not going to sing it for you, but trust me, it's a good song. I was 12, and the term coming out was new to me. I'd never heard it before. I thought it was cool, but I didn't think it had anything to do with being gay or lesbian. The lyrics were more universal. The song championed personal freedom and independence. I could definitely relate, as there were 4 adults in our house, each with 1,000 heavenly mandates. Whenever the song came on the radio, I cranked up the volume and channeled my inner diva. Unfortunately, one morning before we opened, as I sang along in the dining room, I had an unexpected audience. Derek, one of our younger waiters. A member of the old Kung Fu Club, the John Travolta wannabe had a ripped chest that he liked to show off by leaving a button or two undone. As I shook my booty and stretched my lips, pink chopstick in hand, he snuck up behind me, and when I turned around, he swished his hand from side to side. His limp wrist may not have been a motion in American Sign Language, but the gesture was so well known that even a Chinese waiter from Hong Kong understood what it meant. It meant fag. Thankfully, no one else was in the room, and Derek had the memory of a goldfish. He never brought up my dancing again, but his accusation put fear in me. No one in my family had ever said anything anti-gay, not even my grandma, who could spout some pretty offensive things about race and gender, but no one said anything positive about being gay either. That left a big question mark in my mind. How would they react if it turned out to be true, that I was that way? Back in the early 1980s, the perception of gays and lesbians outside the major cities, pre-AIDS and pre-Pride parades, was much harsher, more toxic than it is today. There were no positive role models in music, television, or film. Homosexuals were lumped in with drug users, alcoholics, and pedophiles. There was no guarantee that things would get better. But despite my resistance and denial and the many cold showers I took, I couldn't ignore my growing attraction to boys. It happened too often to be a fluke or a one-off. Until I could figure out what this all meant, I needed space to sort it through. To buy myself time, I tried my best to blend in. After the close call with Derek, I paid more attention to the way my body moved in the world, how I walked and talked and ate and laughed. I started to notice how others were perceiving me too. While I didn't think I had any effeminate habits, I still tried to butch things up. No more silly dancing to the Queen of Motown. I needed to find a strong, respectable male role model, preferably one who was straight. I won't continue reading that story, but that's a story that then leads into like looking to the screen and like seeing Asian American male images. And I usually read a Bruce Lee story. So if you guys have Bruce Lee fans in here, there's a Bruce Lee story in here for you. Okay.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the fact that you're giving away more spoilers than I am.
Oh,
so.
okay, sorry.
No.
Okay.
Hopefully they're teasers to make sure
There's
people...
a lot of pop culture references in the book because I thought that was fun to do.
And then second of all, I forgot that you used the word booty.
Oh.
So that was cool.
Yeah, I'm dating myself.
But it makes me, again, think about the whole idea of coming out, right? I mean, it's something that we have read into Diana Ross's song, right? Because it's not like that, but it also, thinking about turning red again, it's the idea of living in your truth, like we all have that fear of showing our authentic selves, whether it's because you're gay or because you're, whatever, but that fear that you cannot show who you really are into the world, because if you do, you'll be shunned or you'll turn into a big red panda or whatever. So what do you think about the kind of universality of the idea of living in your truth? I mean, I think that, we talk about kind of niche stories, and for so long, writers of color, queer writers have been told that, our stories aren't gonna sell because people can't see themselves in them, but we have to see ourselves in essentially white and straight people narratives all the time, right? So what do you think about or what was your process in thinking about sort of generality in your specific story?
Well, the way you start off that question was about your universal truth being who you are. And because this is DC, I'll give another spoiler alert. So my high school years, I was a young Republican. So if you guys know me, I'm not that anymore. And so I think that part of it was that because one of the accusations that they have about Asian Americans is that we're not very loyal to this country, right? So I was going to out-patriot all the white kids at school. I was a class president, president of the National Honor Society. I went to Boys State. I founded the Young Republican Club. This is during the, Students Against Smoking. I did all that stuff. I used to joke that Margaret Thatcher was my first girlfriend. I was that bad.
And seeing friends of yours in the audience, their heads are exploding now.
Sorry. But that was my way of sort of staying in the closet, right? Of hiding, of not wanting to be perceived as, an outsider, right? I wanted to blend in because that's what happened. My family had moved to an area that was 95, 98% white. And so I thought that was how I needed to behave to get along, right? And much the same way that I was probably hiding my sexuality, I felt like that was a good cover for my race, right? Like, then people wouldn't notice my race if they saw me just waving this giant American flag. So, yeah. I mean,
Nice.
we all find different ways to hide, right? And to
Oh,
try
we
to
sure
fit in,
do.
right? Yeah. I was the Asian Alex P. Keaton. That's what I called myself. Yeah. Yeah. He was really cute. Come on. All right, go ahead. Sure.
So I have a question. Ahu, what does that mean?
Oh, those are the old Chinese ladies that sort of
Okay.
went, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I asked that, it is one of the words that appears in the book, because there are certain things that you describe, right? There are certain things that you translate. There are certain things that you don't translate, whether it's Chinese, like the language exactly, or whether it's like concepts and I feel like this is, as we talk about equity and inclusion and, you know, feeling belonging and, you know, there's a whole idea about like how much do you have to explain?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I was mindful of the things that you explained, but also mindful of the things that you did not explain and the things that I didn't get enough time to Google before I came here tonight.
Yeah.
Like Ahu. But what did, again, in terms of thinking about your process,
Yeah.
like how do you think about what to explain for folks in the course of your writing, and what do you think, like,
Yeah.
Google it?
Well, this gets to the earlier question that you had about the white gaze, right? Like, I think in the past, where people would have-
GAZE.
yeah, those gays too. The gays, you know, where you would have to particularly write stories taking into account what we used to call the GA, the general audience in America, but we don't really have that anymore. Like my day job is I do TV and film, right? And so I often talks about how, like, you know, when I was a kid, you needed about 30 million viewers for a show to stay on the air. By the time I broke into TV, that number had fallen to about 8 to 12 million, but now you only need about 3 or 4 million viewers. And when you're looking at numbers like that, you can actually write something directly to an Asian American audience and have a really good shot at getting renewed. You don't need to reach 30 million. And because of that, you know, not just for small communities like the Asian American communities, but for African American communities, gay and lesbian communities, you see a lot more products, right, that are geared towards us, where you don't have to do the translation. And so that actually applies, like when I was writing the book, when I initially was starting writing, like I would think about like the lines of dialogue, right? And I actually would write them out in Chinese, but then I would put them in parentheses, right? And then I was in one of these writing groups, and one of the guys, he was a professional translator, and he actually said, oh, we don't do that anymore, right? Like, we don't put that in because it takes the readers out. And so you have to write that sentence in a way that the reader can pick it up from context, right? And so that's the way the book is written. I don't translate because they don't do that anymore. And they also don't italicize anymore, right? Because in the past, they would italicize and say, oh, this is a foreign word. But now they don't do that anymore because, you know, I mean, they just assume that it's all one language. This is the voice that I heard as the writer, right? And so why do I have to take these pauses to explain to somebody else? And so that is something that I had to learn, you know, because I think that was just my default. It was like, oh, I need to translate so that everybody understands. But then people are saying, no, let the reader come to you. You know, you don't necessarily have to go where they're at. So,
Great. So I do have other questions about the book, obviously, but because you have such a rich story beyond what's in the memoir, right? And the fun thing about a memoir is that you know how it ends. It ends with you sitting here. But and I, you know, trying to remember. I think I posted this in social media. I'm trying to remember how we first met. And I think it might have been the 20th anniversary of Vincent Chin, the hate crime murder in Detroit. I'm already explaining things. If you don't know the story, you should Google it. But I don't remember whether that was actually the first time we met. I was working I was doing Asian American civil rights at the time, and I was able to bring a flag that we had flown over the Capitol to Detroit to present it to his family. His mother had just died at the gravesite. It's still one of the most kind of historical moments for me. But you did a whole documentary about the legacy of Vincent Chin. What are your thoughts about, and we're just celebrating an anniversary this year, right? Are we? Oh, last year.
yeah, last year.
So you talked a little bit about Vincent Chin in the book. kind of what do you think about his legacy and what thumbprints of his are in the book or in your writing in general?
Well, I mean, it definitely had an influence on me. How many people here know the Vincent Chin story? Do most people know it? Okay. Oh, great. So I won't. So Vincent Chin, he was a close family friend. My uncle was his best man, and so this was obviously a story. It's a horrific hate crime murder that happened in Detroit. For those who don't know, and so he was out celebrating his upcoming wedding, and he went to this strip club, and he got these two white auto workers bashed in his head, right? And so he was in the hospital by the next morning. We found out, and if you're a little kid, you're obviously going to be interested if you know somebody that's in the hospital, right, fighting for their life. And so that I was checking all the newspapers and I was watching all the TV news trying to find out how they're going to report about this story. But nobody wrote about it. It literally took the media 12 days before they covered this story. By that time, he was in the hospital and he died after 4 days. His wedding had been canceled. All this stuff had happened, right? And then finally, one story appeared, and then it took another 10 months before another story appeared. And all the while, the media is constantly writing all these stories about the white auto workers and how difficult they were having, how they were struggling in life. And it just really made me think, like, well, why isn't anybody telling our story? And there's a story in here where I lugged the typewriter into the dining room to start writing letters to the editor. You know what typewriters are, people here? Yeah. So this is a big one, right? And I had to lug it in, and so I would write these letters to the editor, and none of them ever got published. But that's how I started getting into this idea of writing. I mean, before that, I literally thought I was going to be a Chinese waiter for the rest of my life, So I go from waiter to writer, you know what I mean? But because it was a great Chinese restaurant, and I really loved being there. But then after seeing this idea that, who's going to tell our stories, I felt like, well, okay, well, then I'm going to try to do that. And so it did have a profound impact on my life.
There is literally one keystroke away from waiter and writer.
I know. Wow. That'd be the cover of my next book. From waiter to writer.
Nice.
But I also jokingly say that I feel like even though I don't work in a Chinese restaurant, I'm still a Chinese waiter because I live my life trying to please people. Always thinking oh, what do you need? Do you need help? You know what I mean? And so I feel like I'm at my core, I'm still a Chinese waiter, even though I write. Yeah.
No, I think that's. I mean, it also comes back to literally the first words that you write, right? For here or to go. Yeah. Am I here? Am I going? Where is my journey?
Yeah.
At the risk of being a little kind of trite about it.
Yeah.
But so I wanted to, I also want to leave time for questions and answers, but I wanted to see if there was, and I do have another, at least one or two questions here, but I wanted to see if there was anything else you wanted to read or your
I want to read
excerpt
the
about
story
your
about
mom.
my mom. Is that okay? All right. This is for the moms in the audience. Okay. Okay. So this is towards the end of the book. So basically, in the era that I grew up as a gay man, it was during the AIDS era, and given the amount of death that I'd already seen just living in, working in Detroit, I literally thought I'd be dead by the age of 30. I'm of that generation of gay men where it's just like, I don't have a long life ahead of me. And so when it came time to graduating high school and applying to college, I didn't want to go to college, because I thought I have maybe at best a 10, 12 years left to live. Why would I spend 4 years sitting in a classroom again? But, ultimately I decided to apply to college because my mom really guilted me into going. And, but I made a deal with her. I said, I'll apply to one school, and if I don't get in, then I'm not going to college. And she said, okay, fine, but you're applying to Michigan. So she made me apply to Michigan, and I applied to Michigan. And I got in, because I had good records and stuff like that, and I did cool stuff in high school. I was on the Wheel of Fortune in high school. I did all this other cool stuff. So yeah, I got into Michigan. But when I got into Michigan, I still wasn't sure what I was going to do. Because I had rationalized, okay, I'll go to college because what's 4 years of my life given a woman who's given up her whole life for me, right? So that was my decision. And so I went to college not knowing what I was going to do, and then I eventually stumbled into the writing program there. And so I would like to read a story of that, partly because it's a tribute to my mom, too. Okay, so this is towards the end, after I just got into the creative writing program at U of M. Being a creative writing major made me the literary expert at Chung's. That was inevitable, as my dad asked every customer, Have you met our number 3? He's the writer in the family. Every time he mentioned my program, the number
You
of
were son number 3.
I was son number 3, yes, yes. That's how they called me. Oh, he's number 3. Every time he mentioned my program, the number of students accepted got smaller and smaller. At some point, I expect him to say I was the only one allowed on campus to even own a pen. One week, one of our waiters was out sick. My younger siblings were busy with their weekend activities, so I was the one to call in to help. I jumped at the chance to have some home-cooked meals for a few days. I was running around the dining room, refreshing our customers' silver teapots, when a white middle-aged woman reached into her oversized bag and pulled out a colorful hardcover. Have you read this book? It's so good. The Joy Luck Club, the recently released novel that featured a bunch of old sassy Chinese ladies who like to eat, gossip, and play mahjong, could easily have been in the back of our kitchen. Every time I came in to help at the restaurant, another diner, usually older and female, cited the most memorable characters, lines, and scenes. They all wanted to know if I was working on something similar. I was writing poetry, but they didn't care. To them, all writers were the same. They would squeal, "You could be the next Amy Tan." My mom turned out to be the biggest pusher. She rarely had a book in her hand, but the success of the Joy Luck Club convinced her that her life was a bestseller too. She followed me around the dining room, dropping stories from her childhood, the same ones I'd heard growing up, but now she recounted them as if she was auditioning for her own books on tape. One night, after seeing how our waiters sometimes pooled their tips together, my mom shared an oldie. When the communists marched south, they targeted my family. My uncles and grandpa were rich in America, so the Red Guard called us traitors. My stubborn grandma didn't want to leave her big home, so when my parents escaped to Hong Kong, they left me behind to keep her company. The communists hated me and my pawpaw. When I was 4, they made me watch as they forced my grandma to climb the old banyan tree in our courtyard. Then they pushed her off into a pile of broken glass. For a visual, my mom rubbed her knees. Another time, standing in the water station, she launched into her own nautical tale. When I was 5, my uncle in America paid $25,000 in renminbi, a king's ransom in people's money, to a local fisherman to ferry our remaining family out of China. After a long ride tucked under the planks of his fishy fishing boat, we came up for air. But we weren't in Hong Kong. The traitor had turned us in to the authorities. In jail, I had to sing Communist Party songs to earn extra rice for me and my grandma. Another chapter came as we stood beneath a painting of the Chinese countryside. When my pawpaw and I were freed from jail, we found that the officials had given away our home to peasants. We were forced to live several villages away in a dirt hut with 3 other families. Whenever we went out for a pail of water, my grandma had to bend low to keep her head below the soldiers. Once again, she gave me a demonstration, this time bowing her head. Granted, my mom's epic saga interested me. Who wouldn't be intrigued by tales of prison cells, guns, and stolen ransoms? Even the parts about her mundane life in Hong Kong after she was reunited with her parents and siblings were amusing. But these were her stories, not mine. She had to tell them, not me. I was in school to find my own voice. I sat and listened, but that was as far as it would go. Toward the end of the summer, as I was at the back table sipping my red pop for the Midwesterners here, yeah, stockpiling poems for the upcoming semester, my mom sat down. Before I could say anything, she started talking. I was a top student in Hong Kong. When Pepsi came to town, they held a big contest for students to draw a picture of their own school. Mine was the best at Sacred Heart. I won 6 cases. There were so many bottles, I had to give some to the nuns. I threw down my Parker pen, the one I treated myself, after getting into the program. Yes, and they kept burping all day. It was so funny. You've told me that story over and over, and I don't even like Pepsi. I prefer Coke. My mom's shoulders shriveled. The shine faded from her rosy cheeks. You don't want to hear my story? I tensed up. I do, but I'm behind on my own stuff. Between working at Drake's, I don't know if people from Ann Arbor, Drake's, the Journal, and Saving the World, my schedule was packed. On top of that, my workshops in the fall were advanced. Still insecure about my place in the program, I put pressure on myself to create more interesting writing by staying up late and scribbling in my notebook every detail of my life. But no matter how hard I tried, working harder couldn't produce a better poem. My mom lifted herself off her seat. The glint in her eyes orphaned me. Her 42 years of life flashed before my eyes. She'd gone from Guangzhou to Hong Kong to Detroit and spent the past 2 decades raising her 6 children in a hostile foreign land. She tried to prove her life had worth, that it hadn't gone unnoticed, and here I was, the ungrateful son, writing it off. Her lips quivered in a soft murmur. I hastily picked up my pen, backtracking. Go ahead, Mom, I'll write it down this time. My mom bowed her head, and as if I were one of the soldiers holding a gun to her temple, ordering her to sing. You go on. No, you do your own thing. I reached out my hand, but by then she had disappeared through the black swinging door, leaving only the rattling from the kitchen, the clanging woks and rumbling dishwasher. I sat there upset at myself, being so inconsiderate. Everything I had done in the past 3 years had been for her, but it seemed as though I had failed the final test. My education wasn't just to help me get a better life, it was for my whole family. We were a team. We were the 8 immortals. How could I let them down? I needed to make things right, but I knew that like most disappointments in our house, apologies were never spoken. Only deeds would bring about reconciliation. So that's my mom's story. So she finally did get me to write her stories. So they're just embedded in this book. So I always like to read that because it's like, yeah, it's for my mom. So, yeah, thanks.
That whole reading is so meta and ironic, and like you say writing her off, but you're literally writing her in.
Yeah.
Right? And so you're not telling her story, but you are in fact not telling her story by telling her story.
Yeah.
So it brings me to the question of there are obviously other characters in the book.
Yeah.
Your family, the 8. And what was your process of talking to them about writing your book? And
Oh, I didn't. No, they haven't read it yet. Although I think they have now because they posted up pictures saying they received the book, on Tuesday. But I haven't heard from them since. So I'm assuming
you're
they
very
read
busy. You're on a book
I'm
tour.
very busy. Yeah. But the one person I did talk to was my mom. I talked to her quite frequently, like 2 or 3 times a week, just going over details with her and things like that. And so.
Are you going to Detroit?
I will be, yeah. We have a whole series of events November 8th to the 13th. The people in Detroit have really embraced the book. The Detroit Historical Museum organized an exhibit to coincide with my book launch. I was supposed to do a big event at the world headquarters of Ford, but they're on strike right now, so they froze all their money for discretionary stuff like this. But Detroit Free Press, the News have all done pieces. Metro Times, Detroit Public Television did a piece on me. What else? And obviously I'm going back to U of M. Got a big reading there at the Rackham Auditorium, so that'll be a big reading. So the people in Detroit are really excited. I think they're more excited about the egg rolls coming back to town, but I have to tell them, like, sorry, it's just a book. Yeah.
So, great. So speaking of egg rolls, we are kind of on the border of Chinatown here in D.C. DC's Chinatown size or what have you has its own unique history. You live, if memory serves, not too far from LA's Chinatown in another ethnic enclave of Little Tokyo, at the risk of showing how long we've known each other. But you've seen Detroit's Chinatown. You've seen LA's Chinatown, kind of, especially in this moment. Like, what are your thoughts? Because, obviously at our work at Moapia, Chinatown here, the work that we do with the 1882 Foundation, with all the nonprofits that we fund and support here, all the businesses, obviously, the Chinese restaurants that are still here. What are your thoughts about Chinatowns across the country? And go.
I can only speak for the one that I grew up in Detroit. I mean, it was a really small Chinatown. There were like 6 Chinese restaurants, and one of them was Indian. You know what I mean? That's how small we were. And it was a really tough part of town. It was like the red light district, but I did feel really safe there because there was this one street corner that my parents said, you can't go 1 block this way, and you can't go 1 block, and we kind of had our whole world there, and so it was a nice, comforting place for me to grow up, even amidst, being in what was noted as the worst neighborhood in Detroit. So, I only have fond memories. In terms of gentrification and things like that, I try to be even-keeled about this. So my family had this restaurant from 1940 to 2000, and after we closed down, the building has remained empty for 20 years, right? We were the last restaurant in Chinatown. So, after that, it was pretty much dead. And so that place the building has remained empty for 20 years, but finally someone this past year bought the building, and they actually they tracked me down in LA and asked me if I would reopen the restaurant. That's how popular the restaurant was. Like, people have this really long memory of like, please reopen this restaurant. And so I think there was like a 5% of me that thought like, could I do this? Like, could I go back, and reopen this restaurant? But no, there's just too much going on, and I couldn't. But then, like a couple months later, I heard through the grapevine that they actually did find a different restaurant. And part of me was sad because, like, I would have wanted our family to go back into that space and help the city revive too, because there's a lot happening in Detroit right now, and I want to be part of that too. But then, at the end of the day, I just sort of had to let it go and say, like, well, all I could do was hope for the best for whatever family moves in next, and hope that 3177 Cass Avenue provides them with as much love and success and prosperity as it provided for my family. And so I can't be too nostalgic about it. I can't let nostalgia hold back progress, I think. So, it's a tough position to have, so.
No, thank you. I could talk to you all night,
Okay.
but I wanted to see if folks had questions. I see David with a microphone ready to. Are there questions that folks have? David, there's one in the front.
She doesn't look like she's committed to asking a question. I'll say while we wait, Curtis's movie, Vincent Hu, is in our online movie collection. So if you don't have a library card, you can watch Vincent Hu with your library card on Canopy. So really glad to have that connection as part of our library collection as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
What did your mom think of the book?
I don't know yet. She is on the family group chat saying, good luck, have fun, but that's all. But I have a bunch of readings in the Bay Area, and she's going to be there. So,
Is that where she is now?
yeah, she's in the Bay Area. After my dad passed away, we had to move her out there. I really don't know. I bet you it's going to be a lot of mixed emotions for her. Do you know what I mean?
But I'm
because
sure
she
she's
did
very
have
proud.
Huh?
But I'm sure she's very proud.
Yeah, no. She'll also want the spotlight too. She's gonna be like, yeah, that's my son. She'll get in front of the camera. She has no problem with that. But she's had a really difficult life, and I do want to make her happy, and I hope the book brings her joy, and vindicates a lot of stuff, because I think she's always just felt like, she was never had a really chance to live her own life. Yeah.
So we have a question over here, and there's one in the back as well. But go ahead.
Okay, I'll hand it off to you when I finish. But you mentioned Drake's, and
Oh.
that made me very excited, because I grew up going there when I was younger, before it closed. But I was wondering, when you were in Ann Arbor, what were your favorite restaurants, or where else did you go?
Well, I do reference a lot because the whole third section is, but I mean, so I name drop a few places like Cottage Inn and stuff like that. But I was also one of those kids that worked full time and then went to school at night, so I didn't have a very active social life. Like, I didn't, you know what I mean? I didn't, and I regret that sometimes, because I sometimes, because I had to pay for college myself, and I didn't want to leave with any debt. I do. If I do have a regret in life, is that I maybe didn't take advantage of more things in college. Like study abroad programs or things like that. I was just so focused on just getting out of Ann Arbor. You know what I mean? Get my degree and go. So. Okay. Oh, there is one. There's a pivotal scene in here, so you'll have to wait. Why? Is there one that you want to appear? Name the restaurant. Okay. Well, when you if you buy the book and you read it, there's a pivotal moment, in my life that's a decision is made in a Chinese restaurant. It just doesn't have to be our Chinese restaurant. Yeah. So. Okay.
What's your question?
Hello, ni hao.
Hi.
Johan.
I don't speak Chinese.
I know. But anyway, do you think all the bad neighborhoods out there, even in China, and everybody thinks New York's bad, but do you think China could be just as tough?
I'm sorry, repeat the question?
Well, a lot of people read the Bible, and there's a lot of bad times in the world. And
Uh-huh.
do you know God's name?
We're not talking about.
Dios, Jehovah.
We're not talking about religion, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
Oh, was that I think I know the gist of. Oh, okay. Well, I think I have a reference of what he's talking about. So, like, I didn't read much as a kid because I grew up in a Chinese restaurant. You know, I always joke that there were only two types of books that we had at the restaurant, all left behind by our customers. One were Harlequin romances, right? Because we had a lot of single women who would come read. The other one was the Bible, you know. And I always say, like, you know, as a gay Buddhist, I had zero interest in either book. So that's why I didn't read much as a kid. So I think that's the answer to his question, right? Okay. Sorry.
Patrice.
Hey, Curtis.
Hey.
Thank you so much for coming. I love all the different identities that you shared tonight. So, producer, author, you know, your coming out story. There's just so many different identities. What do you want your readers to take away from your memoir?
So, you know, when you sell a book, I don't know how many people would like to sell their own memoir or nonfiction book, but what you do is you have to write this really long marketing proposal. And I said, for the people of color, I'm going to talk about racism. For the gay people, I'm going to talk about the coming out process. For the Jewish people, I'm going to talk about Chinese food. And if I can hit all three audiences, then I think I'll have a bestseller. So, but in terms of what I want, like if I had to do like a pie in the sky hope, you know, all writers want to have impact, right? Like we want our books to matter. And for me, I feel like we live in this really divided country right now where we have these little silos where we don't talk to each other. But Chinese restaurants are actually one of those few places where you can walk in and meet someone, you know, from a different background, racial, religious, sexual orientation, whatever, like sitting at the table right next to you. And if you took the time, maybe even just have a start of a small conversation, like, what are you eating? Like maybe it's those small moments that will maybe bring our country back together again, like finding spaces where we can sit down literally, you know, together. Because I really don't like the divide that we have in our country right now. But I also don't want to skirt some of the issues that are generating some of this tension. And so I jokingly said to my agent, it's sort of like, you know, come for the egg rolls, but stay for the talk on racism, you know. And that's what I want. I want us to be able to have these serious talks about these issues, but I don't want them to drive a wedge. I want us to be, at the end of the day, like family used to do, right? Like you can have these arguments, and at the end of the day, you get up from the table, and you know you're going to see these people again. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's what I would like to hope, that maybe the book can help start a conversation. You know, I don't know. Maybe it's too lofty, but yeah, that's my hope. Yeah.
One egg roll at a time.
One egg roll at a time. That'll be my new phrase.
Solving world peace, one egg roll
world
at a time.
peace, one egg roll at a time. Yeah.
Are there other questions? Oh, yeah, David's coming.
Can you pass this forward? Thanks.
I was telling my child here the title of your book, and she goes, because it's everything I learned in a Chinese restaurant. She goes, even. Okay. She said, even algebra?
Yeah. We learned
So did
everything.
you also learn algebra?
Oh yeah, my mom ran a school, like it was Kumon before there was Kumon, like in that back, like, you know, yeah.
Also, I wasn't, because I wasn't sure how to answer that question. I was like,
Oh, yeah.
I thought this was, you know, hyperbole, but literally you learned everything in the restaurant.
Yeah, we did stuff like that, but that's not what the book is about. I mean, the book is really about the soft skills you learn, because I actually think that those are probably the most important things that you learn in life. You know, and people often ask me, well, what's the first thing that you learned growing up, giving the title of your book? Everything I learned in a Chinese restaurant. I talk about, this is a lesson that I learned primarily from my dad, but also from my mom, is, you know, when you're a kid, you tell your kids, don't talk to strangers, right? My parents gave us the exact opposite instruction. They said talk to strangers, and who they were talking about were all the people sitting in our dining room. because my mom didn't graduate high school. My dad went to community college for 2 semesters. They didn't necessarily know all the opportunities that existed for us outside the 4 walls of that Chinese restaurant. But they knew they had a dining room full of people that actually had these opportunities, that had this knowledge. And so whenever my dad would meet a customer that he really clicked with or had an interesting job, whatever, he'd call all 6 of us kids to run over, and we'd like barrage these poor customers with questions of like, what do you do for a living? How'd you get your job? How much money do you make? You know? And so, yeah, just this idea of like, you know, not being afraid of talking to people that are different from you, not being afraid of asking questions or even asking for help. I mean, those are really important things, you know, to learn in life. How to be able to communicate with people who are completely different. And because our restaurant really serviced all of Detroit, right? Like during the day, it'd be a lot of, you know, white-collar workers from the downtown businesses or people from Wayne State or from the Med Center that was really close by. But then at night, it would literally be the pimps, the prostitutes, and the drug dealers. Do you know what I mean? And so as a kid, I saw all of Detroit, you know, and to be able to communicate with all of these people at their level, I think is just was something that I grew up with, and I feel like I like to think of it's just, I don't know, it's nice to be able to do that, to be able to communicate with people.
You can't get that kind of education at a school institution, that's for sure.
No, not necessarily, yeah, because oftentimes, you know, we're so stratified, right? Like in these paths that we have in life, you're sort of tracked in with all the same people that have very similar backgrounds to you. But if you work in food service, I don't know anybody here who's worked as a restaurant as a kid, you are instantly thrown in with people from different backgrounds, and you have to learn how to relate and listen to them and understand them in a way, you know, that really forces you to see that the world is really big at one time, but also very small at the same time too. Yeah.
I'm seeing some nods about restaurant
you.
workers. Do we have time? Maybe 1 or 2 more questions? I see.
Yeah, how many people are here from Detroit?
Okay, that's your question. No.
And Curtis knows what I'm going to ask about. Do you know about almond boneless chicken? Yeah. Okay, Curtis, can you tell the crowd about this dish and how it's uniquely Detroit and you know how it was instrumental in your family's restaurant?
Okay. Does anybody here know my family's restaurant, Chung's, or eaten there? I don't know if anybody has, but it was in the center, and it was really popular for many generations. It was the Chinese restaurant. I like to think of it that way. And so my grandmother used to say that we were the inventors of this dish called almond boneless chicken, which you can find at pretty much any Chinese restaurant in Detroit, but it's very hard to find in other places. It's a really basic dish, right? It's a white chicken meat, a fillet, battered and then deep fried, and then a brown gravy, a soy sauce gravy, and then sprinkled with crushed almonds and maybe a little, you know, slices of pea pods, and then served with a bowl of white rice, right? It's just a really, really popular dish. And so I actually, after this book came out, America's Test Kitchen, which is a show, asked me to do an episode for them, for their podcast, yeah, exploring that dish and my grandmother's theory about whether or not we invented it. And I think what I came to this conclusion after doing research, like looking at all these old menus, because we have old menus from the 30s, from when we, you know, like, and stuff like that, and I think I pinpointed that, at least in the lore of Detroit, that it's actually a marriage between a traditional Cantonese dish called almond pressed duck, which is like a breaded, you know, duck and battered and fried with, you know, the soul food, right? Because what happened, the dish sort of came about in the 60s. What happened was that in the late 50s, the city of Detroit demolished both the Chinatown and Black Bottom, Paradise Valley, which is where a lot of the black culture was centered. And because of that, both communities had to move into this area called the Cass Corridor, which is, you know, originally like a lot of poor white people, but now it was all poor people of all colors. But because of that interaction between, you know, the poor blacks and the poor Chinese people, you sort of have this marriage that created this dish called almond boneless chicken. So that sort of came out of the 60s, you know, and so.
Yeah, no, we were talking about this earlier when you were on Sporkful, the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought that they had your recipe on it in the show notes, but maybe they didn't.
They may have added it from the website because there are other people that have it, you know. And like I said, and I said this to them, it's just a theory. I know there's a million people that are going to come out of the woodwork and say, bullshit, like, you know. but they said you can go with it because it's just this idea of let's explore culture and how conversations can happen. And so I said, okay, if I can be wrong, that's why I'm just covering myself just in case, like people like,
Okay, I'm getting the hook. I think we have time for one more question.
I guess you mentioned before that you weren't much of a reader growing up. So what was the catalyst that got you to be interested in writing and become a writer?
Well, it was the Vincent Chin case. That's when I first started writing. And then literally going off to college, because I was working full time, you could take creative writing classes at night. And they seemed like easy A's. so I was like, okay, I'll get an easy A, because you didn't have to do much, right? You didn't have to read much. You just write a few poems and then you graduate. So, But I always did enjoy words. I mean, like in the sense that because when you're sitting in a Chinese restaurant as a kid, there's not much to do, right? So you end up like reading the newspapers over and over, and you do the word puzzles and all that kind of stuff. So I did like words individually, but I never read books per se. I did read the newspaper, because that was around. But the idea of being a writer and being a professional writer, that didn't happen until I got to Michigan, And so that is something I am thankful for. I mean, in the sense that the college did, set me on this path to being a writer. And so, I've had a really great career. I feel very blessed, to have the experiences I've had in life. So I don't know what to say.
Great.
Get carried
No, well, first of all, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Washington, D.C., whenever we bring folks here, we always talk about national politics and the White House and what's going on down there. But what I loved about tonight's conversation was that it was so local.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't even have to be about our Chinatown, right? Just the fact that there are cities out there that, despite whatever might be happening on Capitol Hill or whatever, there are vibrant neighborhoods in Chinatowns, whether in Detroit or LA or DC. So I just really wanted to thank you for reminding us of all that.
Okay. Yeah.
And that Chinatown is here. The restaurants are going to be open when we get out of here. But I do want, and we'll have you sign books, obviously.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to see, again, thank you. Can we give him a round of applause?
Thank you so much. And so as I mentioned earlier, this is the start of my tour. After this, I am literally on the road straight until November 20th, except for 3 nights when I'm back in LA, but also doing readings there. So I'll be everywhere from Seattle to Miami to Boston. So please check out my website. Hopefully you can, have friends or family who can join me on